Hello and welcome back to Bits and Bobs. In today's video we'll be covering the life and legacy of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So let's fly back in time and start where it all began, with this couple here. On the right we see King George VI, the Queen's father, and on the left is Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who was the Queen's mother. The clue is in the name. And on the 21st of April 1926, their first child was born. And here she is, at the time Princess Elizabeth, who was born in London in Mayfair. When she was born, the young princess never expected to be queen, and for the early years in her childhood, she spent her time getting private tutoring rather than going to public school, but still never expecting to be the queen. In 1934, aged only 8 years old, she met the then 13-year-old Prince Philip. They fell in love at first sight and later on would get married and have a long and happy marriage together. But it wouldn't be long until a very influential event on Queen Elizabeth II's life was to happen. Her uncle, King Edward VIII, abdicated from the throne only 10 months after getting it, to go and live with his wife in America. His brother, King George VI, took the throne, meaning that the eldest child now in line to the throne was Princess Elizabeth. At only 10 years old in 1936, Elizabeth II became heir to the throne of England. But even though she was heir to the throne of England, it did not stop her from serving her country. In World War II, she joined and helped out the British Armed Forces. Aged 18, she joined the ATS, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, and helped serve winning the war during the last years of the conflict. But after the war back home, happy times returned, and in 1947, she married the love of her life, Prince Philip. This would go on to be a long and happy marriage, and she would rely on Prince Philip for advice and strength throughout her reign. Now then, in 1952, her father, King George VI, passed away on the 6th of February, meaning that on the 6th of February in 1952, Queen Elizabeth II became monarch of the British Isles and Empire and Commonwealth overseas. The year after, in 1953, was the Queen's coronation, and this was the first ever televised and broadcast coronation for a UK monarch. Now that she has become queen, let's take it century by century and go through the next 70 years, picking out all the key points and historical moments involving Queen Elizabeth II. So, first up then is the 1950s. The first major royal event of the 1950s was, of course, the Queen's travels abroad. Her and Philip did many visitations to different countries during this time. In fact, in the 50s, the Queen even addressed the United Nations Council, a very cool thing to do. And now we'll move on to the 1960s. So then, the first major event of the 1960s was the birth of her fourth and final child. Here we see her 4 children, with Prince Charles being the eldest and next in line to the throne. In 1966, Queen Elizabeth II shook hands and presented the captain of the England team with the trophy for winning the World Cup. Also in the 1960s, the QE2 was named after the Queen and set sail. And next up is the 1970s. So, firstly, in the 1970s, we have the decimalisation of the UK currency. Queen Elizabeth II struck the very first decimal penny at the Royal Mint, marking the official start to the new coinage of the nation. In 1972, her and Prince Philip celebrated their silver wedding anniversary for 25 years of marriage. Next up, in 1977, the Queen celebrated her Silver Jubilee, her first jubilee as monarch, and there were lots of celebrations up and down the country for this momentous occasion and event. And also in the 70s, the Queen swore in the first ever female Prime Minister. And now we move on to the 1980s. This started with the Queen Mother's 80th birthday, for which there were lots of celebrations up and down the country, and especially in the royal households. The biggest event of the year, though, one that caused even more celebration, was the wedding of Charles, the eldest son and next in line to the throne, to Lady Diana Spencer, now Princess Diana, after marrying Prince Charles. And then, in 1986, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her 60th birthday, which caused lots of celebration once again. And now we'll move on to the 1990s. In 1992, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her 40th year on the throne, known as the Ruby Jubilee, so this was a good occasion to mark that year. Later that year, in 1997, the news of Princess Diana's death in a car crash in France was brought to the royal family. This, of course, caused much sadness, and a very large funeral was held in her honour. Now we move on to the 2000s. This started off with the Queen's mother turning 100 years old. Keeping with tradition for anyone who turns a century old, the Queen wrote a personal letter to her own mother to celebrate this milestone of a birthday, a very touching tribute. In 2001, Queen Elizabeth's sister, Princess Margaret, died of a heart attack, and the year later her mother also passed. This was a very sad time. However, to cheer things up, the year after this, there was the Golden Jubilee, which brought lots and lots of happiness and celebration all over the country and to the Queen. In 2005, the Queen's son, Prince Charles, married Camilla. And now we move on to the 2010s. The name's Majesty, Her Majesty. In 2012, at the start of the Olympics, Queen Elizabeth II assisted James Bond in a parachute mission down to the London Olympic Stadium below. That same year was also the Diamond Jubilee, and this was the second ever Diamond Jubilee to ever be held. The first was Queen Victoria's back in 1897. However, on September the 9th of 2015, the Queen officially passed Queen Victoria's record and became the longest reigning UK monarch. At age 96 in 2017, Prince Philip retired from royal duties after completing over 25,000 royal assignments, a well-due retirement at that age and after doing so much. And now we move on to the 2020s. This started off, of course, with the lockdown and the Queen's broadcast to people, giving them moral support through the hard times of the virus lockdown. Then, the sad news came in 2021 that Prince Philip had passed away, only months before his 100th birthday. This brought great sadness to the nation and, of course, to the Queen. The year after, in 2022, the Platinum Jubilee events were held. This was the first ever Platinum Jubilee in history and was a time of much celebration. However, later in the year, on the 8th of September 2022, the news of Queen Elizabeth II's passing was broadcast. Her funeral was later that year, and we laid to rest a wonderful queen.